And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Navigating the Modern Workforce, Diversity, Culture, and Generations. Today's session will be presented by Executive Leadership Coach and Professional Development Consultant, Mr. Brian Ackles. Brian, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I really appreciate that introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. This is an interesting topic, and it's very interesting for our times to start looking and delving a little bit deeper into what the modern workforce actually consists of, because things have changed and things continue to change. So we have a few objectives that I want to get through today in the next 45 minutes or so. And it's identifying some of the drivers of change, and what is changing, and what does a modern leader have to think about, and have to be cognizant about. Looking at the power and recognizing the power of a multi-generational workforce, and we'll get into this a little bit more. And look at culture and develop an appreciation of culture as a strategic differentiator within your organization, and how culture is changing, both as a result of a multi-generational workforce, but also as just pure cultural diversity within society is changing as well. And also begin to talk and look at some of the areas where you can adapt as a leader to this rapidly changing workplace, and some of the things you need to be conscious of as a leader in these organizations. So let's get started and talk about today's world. Well, as the slide title says, it's complex. We've got constantly changing technology, which is it's almost trite to say that now. We've been dealing in the technological revolution for 25 plus years. And it just doesn't stop, and it hasn't stopped. I wouldn't even care to even guess what the next big thing is going to be. All I know is that it constantly does change and adapt, and it constantly evolves, and how we use technology constantly evolves. The whole issue of globalization, it is blurring the borders of commerce. It is blurring the borders of how we view the world. We have instant access to information from all over the globe. I'm sitting here in Canada. I know that in the U.S., for instance, in the U.S., it's Thanksgiving week, and Black Friday is all over the news, and Cyber Monday following Monday. Well, that's also in Canada, which might be somewhat of a surprise to you. We follow those same traditions because it's a global economy. There's increasing legal and regulatory compliance. There's a lot more scrutiny on business. There's a lot more scrutiny on companies doing the right thing and actually being held to account to follow the rules. And on top of all of this is the issue of organizational structures, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But traditional structures need to change just to adapt to the rest of the complexity that we're facing. There's also this idea of how long you stay in a business, and how transient the workforce is. Large organizations are operating globally, 70 plus countries, hundreds of thousands of people potentially, and it's all about outsourcing. I work as a consultant. I also work at a full-time role as well, and that's not uncommon even amongst the colleagues that I work with in my full-time job. A large percentage of the workforce is global, and it's transient, and it moves around. I've been fortunate even in my career to live and work around the world, and that's not unusual. I have colleagues whose children are now into adulthood and are educated and starting to move, and they're traveling and moving around the world as well. This is also blurring the borders of organizations, and it's creating a world where it's not uncommon to pick up the phone or to call somebody overseas, to call somebody in a different part of the world, anywhere in the world, whether it's by phone or whether it's IMing or email, whatever your communication choice is. It's not uncommon to use all of these technologies to talk to anybody real time anywhere in the world. This is something which organizations are struggling to adapt to. And in all of this, we look at the requirements for leadership. Now, leadership, managers and leaders in organizations that are in this hugely globalized workforce with a transient workforce, large multinational organizations, tremendous amounts of outsourcing, have to be very agile and have to be able to work very quickly and adapt very quickly to changing situations. And leadership also must be very authentic. And we'll talk more about authentic leadership in a minute. But as a leader, you've got to serve the best interests of everybody that you're working with. And it's everybody that you're working with both in your immediate environment, but also everybody that you're working with in the greatly extended environment that becomes part of your team or part of your customer base or part of your organization. Many leaders, and well, a lot of leaders now have teams which are not completely co-located. They're dealing with a co-located workforce, but they're also dealing with a virtual workforce as well. People who are either working from home, people who are working on an outsourced contract from another part of the world. Leaders need to know about these people. You need to know about everybody on your team. And that also means that you need to develop a cultural appreciation for everybody on your team. You learn about what each person values. You're looking for ways to increase collaboration amongst this diverse workforce. And you're building these personal connections with this wide range of people. And it means that you have to learn to listen very closely to this wide range of concerns that people are going to have, particularly when you tie in the multi-generational workforce, you tie in different cultures, you tie in different requirements that people have within their careers. All of this becomes much more complex than it has been. So authentic leadership and agility, these are really the watchwords for the new organization and for the new manager. So the modern leader needs to look at different ways of thinking. How do you wrap your head around dealing with people in multiple time zones? How do you communicate with people? Take for instance, when do you schedule a meeting if you have a project team that spans the globe, and you have to have a meeting where you've got people on the East Coast and West Coast of North America, perhaps overseas in Europe or in the subcontinent, in Asia, wherever. What time do you schedule a meeting? So you start looking at time zones, you start gaining an understanding of, well, when do people actually work during the day? Is it okay to have a meeting at 10 o'clock at night? Well, it very much depends on the nature of the project that you're with and the nature of communication that you have to have. You also have to understand the different ways that people learn. People in different cultures learn in different ways. So we're dealing with this multicultural workforce, we're dealing with this multi-generational workforce, and leaders have to be able to deal with this level of difference and deal with all of these challenges. And you have to think about this and you have to plan for this. It's not something that comes naturally. It's not something that you can basically wing. All of this takes some time as a leader, so you've got to set aside time to work through all of this. So you've got all these challenges that leaders have to deal with, and there's challenges that the managers have to be talking with different people, talking about different ways of doing things. But then you've got to look at the organizational structure and start looking at how organizations actually are structured in terms of power. Traditional organizations are very hierarchical. They have a top, they have branches, and under each branch there's more branches, and it's a tree structure, and power is concentrated at the top. So as we start to spread the workforce around, we start to look at different ways of trying to decentralize power. So these new types of structures, which are trying to flatten out, are really encouraging diversity within the organization. They're encouraging an inclusive decision-making model where they're trying to gather information from more and more sources to make decisions. They're encouraging participation across the workforce. So you're trying to get people to actually put their inputs in and know that their inputs are going to be listened to and taken into account for decisions affecting the organization, affecting the direction of the organization, and affecting the direction of a project, the the deliverables for a project, potentially how customers will be acquired, how customers will be treated. It encourages more collaboration both within the organization and more collaboration outside of the organization as well. So looking at collaborating with different industry partners potentially to provide solutions together for a particular customer or for a particular market segment. And it encourages cooperation. So as you flatten organizations and you start to decentralize power, you set up a situation where organizations need to cooperate amongst their divisions in order to get things done, because there's no one person saying, thou shalt do this. You have a number of people who have to come together, collaborate, cooperate, and make decisions. It also encourages, and this is kind of hard to get your head around, but it encourages individualism, because you're flattening out structures and you're flattening out power. It allows people to express themselves more as an individual and not be as conscious of the alignment required within an organization. You don't all have to dress in the blue suit with the blue tie and the white shirt. And for those of you that might be chuckling right now, you'll recognize that as a dig at IBM, and I hope this has changed. You don't see that type of corporate lockstep anymore. People are encouraged to express themselves and to be more individual. But that individualism doesn't mean that they're not working in a cooperative, collaborative, participative environment. So all of this needs to come together. So this diversity is really the new advantage for organizations. And the more diverse an organization is, the more engaged their workforce is going to be. And the more diverse an organization is, likely they're going to be outperforming a workforce that isn't diverse. So, and these types of issues are new to a lot of businesses. And dealing with these diverse workplaces, and diversity both in culture, in language, in structure, requires a different set of skills within the leadership and a different type of understanding within the organization itself of the skills that are required to manage this. Skills in cultural intelligence, skills in emotional intelligence, and overall strong social skills. If you're working with a workforce that spans multiple countries, multiple generations, multiple cultures, multiple languages, your social skills as a leader and as a manager are going to be critical to this, as is your ability to manage your emotions and manage your understanding of the diversity and the differences within cultures. Not everybody does things the same way. I've been fortunate in my career to live and work around the world, and I've done a lot of traveling with my partner as well. And one of the things that I've found is that one of the best things that I've experienced is to go in and learn about a culture, not just on the surface level, but also able to peel down and get a little bit further inside of the culture and start understanding some of the challenges. And I can give you a very specific example. I lived and worked in Sweden. I'm Canadian, born and raised in Canada. I took an overseas contract in Stockholm a few years ago, and we were there for 2 years. And one of our neighbors in this apartment building, a Swedish couple, we kept seeing them, and they said, "Oh, we must get together for a drink some night." And we constantly said, "Yes, that would be a great idea." And it wasn't until about 18 months later, we never got an invitation. We just kept seeing these people that kept saying, "We must get together for a drink some night." Later on, we realized, well, 6 months before we were leaving the country, that what Swedish culture actually requires is that when somebody says, "We must get together for a drink," it's now incumbent on the person being invited to suggest a time. Oh, I mean, the proper response from us would have been, "Oh, well, how about next Friday?" And that was not something that we were used to doing in the way that we were raised, in the way that we grew up in Canada. And it's a very trivial example, but it's one of those things that you don't find on the surface of the culture. You have to start to peel down and start to understand. And leaders and managers in these diverse organizations need to be able to get to that core. And underlying all of this is trust. You've got to be able to trust the people in your team. Trust is the foundation of the organization, and it's the foundation of how we're working now in the future. All of this leads to engagement, and this discussions about engagement. And I'm not going to talk about the numbers of engagement. We've heard them all before. We know that we're facing an engagement issue across industry, and that really hasn't changed in a great number of years. And we're constantly trying to find ways to increase employee engagement. But one of the things that stops or creates barriers to employee engagement is this lack of trust. Lack of trust and poor relationships between management and staff. So leaders who create an atmosphere of fear, who create an atmosphere of distress, are doing tremendous harm to an organization. A close colleague of mine started a new job just over a year ago. Very, very experienced in his field. Went into this organization, a family-run business. Very patriarchal, but he worked with his team of people. He had a wide range of people working in a production and management environment working for him, and he had a very participatory, very inclusive management style, built on trust, built on engagement, built on lots of communication. And after about a year, he was summarily fired, because the culture in that organization was a culture of fear and distrust. So they didn't like the fact that he was able to, that he was working with his team in a way that wasn't based on threats and intimidation. Now, his team loved it, and his team was very productive, but the organization couldn't manage that, couldn't deal with that. And as a result of him leaving, which was bad enough, they've lost a number of other people who have actually quit and walked out the door as a result of this guy getting fired. So they've done themselves much more harm than just getting rid of one manager who they didn't agree with their management philosophy. They've actually lost some key people in the organization as well. So this, all of these types of things, people who manage in this way of fear and distrust, they're affecting employees. They're affecting employees' health and well-being, absolutely. Levels of engagement and performance. If you're not engaged and if you're not trusted and you're working in an atmosphere of fear, are you going to do a great job? Probably not. Are you going to be engaged? Are you going to be willing to take the extra step to do things for the organization? Probably not. As we look at this issue of engagement, and we look at how the challenges of creating engagement in this new workplace, in this new cultural milieu that we're working in, we also are recognizing that we're dealing, not uncommonly, with a very multi-generational workforce. Not uncommon to have 4 generations working in your organization right now. So you've got the traditionalists born between 1928 and 1945. You've got the baby boomers, of which I'm happy to say I am one. I'm at the tail end of it, but I'm still classed as a baby boomer, which is nice. You've got Gen X, 65 to 79, and we have the Millennials, 77 to 2000. And there's actually there's a 5th which is entering the workforce now as well, which is the so-called Gen Z. So 4 to 5 generations in the workforce, not uncommon. So where do you fit in all of this? So Kelly, if you could go ahead and run this first poll, please. I'm fortunate in the organization that I work in. I do work in a very, very multi-generational workforce, and I don't know We're not quite down to Gen Z yet. That would still be, they would be about 17, but by the time I do come to retirement, we'll probably be close to five generations in the workforce. So, and some of you may have that already. So how are we doing, Kelly?
All right, it looks like we were about 17% baby boomer, 40% Gen X, and 43% millennial.
And no traditionalists.
None.
None.
Or maybe they just didn't want to do the poll. I don't know.
Fair enough. Thanks, Kelly. So, unsurprisingly, you know, boomers we're in the minority now, and not surprising. Millennials and Gen X certainly taking up the lead, with a slight advantage in percentage going to millennials, and that's actually reflective of what we're seeing within organizations as well. And if you look at age groups and where people are coming up through the workplace, it's not surprising. Boomers are retiring, so their numbers are dropping out of the workplace. Traditionalists have retired or are retiring or on the cusp of retirement, so they're a very, very small percentage, still there, still valuable and valid, absolutely. But you know, the millennials are the people that started off, or the Gen Xers, are now moving into, moving through the organizations as well, and their numbers will begin to drop, and then we're left into millennials, and then the next generation's coming up. And we'll talk a bit more about this. The thing is, when you start looking at organizations and you start looking at the types of different types of people that you've got in organizations, each one of these groups, traditionalists, boomers, Gen X, millennials, all respond differently to engagement. So the approaches that you take as a manager, the approaches you take as a leader, you really need to be conscious of what you're doing and what audience you're actually targeting for engagement. Because traditionalists will who are coming to the end of their career, what does engagement mean to them? It'll mean something completely different to a millennial, for instance, when they're just starting out in their career, or they're starting to begin to advance through the organization. So you need to be able to gauge that. And like the slide said, millennials are taking over. And unsurprising, it's a sign of people who are educated and moving into the workforce and moving through the workforce. And the thing is about millennials, and 43% of you should be able to recognize this. You've grown up collaborating in teams. Diversity is expected and important. And if there is no diversity in the workplace, something is wrong. There's something wrong with the organization if they're not seeing some level of diversity. Millennials are also one of the most educated generations ever at this point. And we talk about tech savvy. As I said, I'm a boomer. I grew up before the dawn of the dawn of the internet. It was just in its infancy. My first telephone was a rotary dial phone. Yeah, I know I'm dating myself. I've made my career in technology, and I love it and I embrace it, and I certainly enjoy it. But I look at others that I deal with who are younger and who have been brought up with technology as part of their everyday existence. It's a different mindset towards the use. Millennials have been a more highly sheltered and protected generation, and I won't go into the societal and cultural reasons behind that. But the interesting statistic here is that 1 in 4 millennials, and I'll say this is primarily would be in the Western world, come from a single parent home, which again starts to change and drive behavior and change thinking. So in 2015, 35% of the workforce was millennials. By 2020, 1 in 3 will be millennials. And by 2025, 3 out of 4 will be millennials. So we seem to be on this call, on this webinar, we seem to be closer to somewhere around the 2020 numbers. And it's not uncommon. I'll just leave it at that. So we've got this vastly diverse workforce. We've got this vastly diverse generations within the workforce, and leaders must learn how to naturally connect within these environments. So really great leaders capitalize on these differences. Differences in ethnic or cultural background, differences in age, differences in any way, job functions, personality types. Take a traditionalist in an organization, a great leader who has a traditionalist working with them or a number of traditionalists working for them. These people are a wealth of information about the industry, about the background, about the customer base, and these people have this underlying grasp of what's going on. The boomers have been working through and working with the company and worked through maybe a longer period with the company. Boomers, again, typically tend to stay with the company longer, so they've got more history with an organization. And again, they become this wealth of information and being able to provide mentorship to younger generations. Millennials who have a tremendous number of ideas, Gen X's and millennials who have all these ideas. And how do we harness that power? So a good leader looks at each different group of people they've got working with them and uses them. I won't say uses, that's sort of the wrong idea, but gets the best out of them by recognizing what each group brings to the table. And all of this ties back into motivation. So again, you've got all these multiple groups of people. How do you motivate people? How do you motivate a traditionalist at nearing the end of their career? How do you motivate a millennial? How do you motivate a baby boomer? How do you motivate a Gen Xer? How do you motivate someone in Gen Z that's just coming into the workplace now? You know, what types of changes? How do people react to motivation? And it has changed. Motivation has changed a lot in the last 100 years. So think about it. For those of us who may be a little bit more gray hair, you know, how were we motivated when we first started in our careers? Well, we were given responsibility and we were given money, and we were, you know, you got a raise every year. You maybe got a bonus. You maybe got a promotion, or you got a promise of a promotion, and that was the motivation that worked for us. And maybe still does work for many of us. I don't know. Can't say for sure. Each person is different. But let's jump ahead now and look at millennials. What motivates a millennial? Well, if you're dealing with a group of people who have grown up in a team environment and in a very diverse environment, you know, working on their own is not something that a millennial is going to be, you know, naturally really interested in. And again, these are general statements. They certainly don't apply to everybody. But working within teams, working and being able to provide an atmosphere where their own individual contributions can aid in the success of the team. Well, how do you create that motivating environment for a millennial? And these are some of the challenges that leaders face, because you create that environment for a millennial, but that might not work as well for a baby boomer or a traditionalist, where you've got that, you know, you've got more people who are working in more of an individual contributor role. So you need to think about different ways of motivating your people based on who they are. And this means, and we go right back to the beginning of this webinar, you need to get to know people and get to understand what actually motivates them. So one of the things that has become much more important of late is organizational theory. And it's trying to understand it's studying how people in the workplace look at things. Why do they do things? Why are some people engaged? Why are some people disengaged? And it breaks down into 5 different areas of interest: behavioral, cognitive, psychodynamic, humanistic, and personality types. So behavioral really talks about changing human behavior. And this is can be embodied by the carrot-and-stick approach. You will do this or else I will punish you. So that can become a behavioral change. Not necessarily the best thing to be thinking about, but it still happens in organizations. If you don't do this, something bad will happen. And then you have the cognitive approach of organizational theory. And this is really looking at achieving goals through cognitive persuasion. So getting sort of mental buy-in of visions and goals. And that's more of a cognitive approach. And then you have the psychodynamic approach, and the psychodynamics within an organization is it's more the emotional response and it's emotional memory, and it's about personal growth. And it's understanding that emotions and feelings are real and they should be valued within the organization. This is where emotional intelligence comes into play as well. The humanistic approach, it's about managing potential, and it's about understanding that people desire growth and development, and people desire the opportunities for growth and development in some way, shape, or form. Not everybody wants the same thing, though. People generally want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And that's a very powerful thought if you think of it. You know, if you step back from it, people want to be part of something greater than themselves. So if you can create that environment where people can recognize, and your staff can recognize, that they're contributing to something greater than themselves, this starts to change the way they engage within the workplace as well. And also, and the final area of interest in terms of organizational theory is looking at different personality types. And there are a number of personality evaluation types out there that look at how you respond in a team environment, how you respond in terms of introvert, extrovert, how there just are multiple ways of measuring this. Bottom line is, if you're looking at diversity within an organization, you're going to have multiple personality types, and as a leader, you have to be able to recognize how to deal with those different personality types. So understand what people want, and you know, you need to look at how people feel about their work, feel about their involvement at work. So you're investing time with them to build relationships. You're trying to understand who they are. You're understanding what they value out of their lives, what they value about their work, about their career, about their work-life balance. You're demonstrating a lot of respect. You are truly caring about them as people, and you're evidencing a lot of trust in your relationships. You trust people to get on with the job. So in this new environment, in this fast-paced, changing environment that we're dealing with, micromanagement is a thing that just cannot happen. If you're micromanaging people, it's seen almost immediately as a sign of distrust, and it's seen as it demotivates and disengages people from the workplace. If you're being micromanaged, why should I think about what I'm doing? You're going to tell me, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go home, I don't care. So that's something to be very conscious of. Now, there's a difference between micromanaging and coaching and mentoring, or particularly coaching. You know, coaching somebody new to the workplace, coaching someone that doesn't have the experience, or they're just learning the new skills that they need for what they're doing, that's different than telling them what to do. You're working with them, you're coaching them you're asking the right questions, and you're building their confidence in what they're doing. And you're also recognizing the contributions that they're bringing. So again, let's go back to this new person that you're bringing up through the organization. As they succeed and as they contribute to the organization, you're recognizing those small steps or those small wins. Through all of this, you're developing as a leader an understanding and an appreciation of what each person is bringing to the organization. Everybody has unique qualities. Everybody has unique attributes. Everybody brings something different to an organization, and that difference is to be held up and looked at in awe in a lot of cases. Because if you recognize it and you can leverage those differences and you can leverage those qualities and attributes, your organization is going to be a lot stronger. You need to understand career expectations. We saw growing up, and I say we, the boomers in the audience, 17% of you and myself, we saw three things in life: go to school, get a job, retire. Now, get a good job in one organization, less and less that's happening. So job security now, as generations have changed, is not the same. Generally, people are not going to work for an organization with the expectation of staying there 35 years and getting a gold watch and retiring. People are looking for a challenge. People are looking for a broader range of experience. They're going to an organization, they're working hard, they're contributing well to the organization, and they're learning. And then at some point, that learning is they're going to say, well, you know what? I've learned what I've wanted to learn here. Now I'm going to go somewhere else. And I'm going to apply what I've learned here and learn something new as well. So working for 2, 3, or more organizations during your career is certainly not uncommon. And the rise of independent consultants sort of evidences this. Working and gathering knowledge, gathering information, gathering skills enables you to contribute to a wider range. Now, other organizations, on the converse of this, organizations must understand this. So when they're interviewing people, and when you're interviewing people, you're looking not so much to say, well, why have you had 2 or 3 jobs in the last 10 years? The question should better be asked is, what did you learn from these jobs that you've had in the last 10 years, and how is that learning going to apply to the position that we're talking about here? So it's a different mindset. Now, if that answer works for you and your organization and it satisfies what you need, fantastic. And if not, well, then that changes things. But you're interviewing in a different way as well. So the other part that comes into this is work-life balance. And work-life balance is on top of everybody's minds. Now, this is a very cultural issue as well. So work-life balance changes depending on depending on the culture that you work in. And it can change even within different regions of the country. As I said, I'm Canadian. I'm currently living in British Columbia in Canada, and my requirement for work-life balance is different than somebody's requirement for work-life balance in Toronto or in the central part of the country, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, or in the eastern part of the country. So there are regional differences within a country. There are certainly differences between different countries as well about how people view work. So again, as a leader, you're juggling all of these things, and you're juggling all of this across multiple generations as well. So it becomes a bit of a matrix, and as a leader, it becomes a real juggling act. But it's something that you'd spend time with, and as you get to know people, you get to understand all of these things. So one of the things I would like to know, and Kelly, if you can go ahead and run this poll, is whether you have actually had an explicit career discussion with your manager in the last 12 months. I know a lot of organizations have very formal planning sessions, etc., but how often do you actually get to talk about your career? Okay.
All right, there's the results there. 56% yes, 44% no.
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, we'll call it a 50-50 split then, whether people have had an explicit career discussion. Now, this is a challenge. This is a challenge for organizations. And leaders should really be doing this, is having these discussions with their staff and having these discussions with their people as to what they want out of their career, and how the balance between the organizational need and the career development need of the employee as well. Because again, it's not going to be all one-sided. The career development of someone might be at odds with or the career desires of a person may be at odds with what the organization is trying to do. But that being said, there has to be some balance. If a person is working for the organization, they're likely going to see some future for themselves there, or some future learnings that they're going to be able to, or future contributions they're going to make to the organization. And if they can learn more, develop their career more, then those contributions will be better for both them and for the organization. So we want to promote involvement in this discussion. We want to promote involvement with people within the organization. Having these career discussions is certainly part of it, and it's also part of increasing levels of engagement. Because having the career discussion is one thing, of course, but in order to maintain trust with people as well, following through on any commitments that are made during those career discussions is also really, really important. So all of involvement, discussions, getting to know people, this influences how people feel about themselves as well. If someone's generally passionately interested or genuinely interested in your career, or if you're genuinely interested in your staff's career, they're going to feel better about themselves and better about working for the organization. We talked about this earlier, and it's a challenge for leaders that organizations are still designed like a machine, top-down chain of authority and many layers of management. So again, the consideration now is to find different ways of structuring organization, looking at organizational policies and procedures and processes to flatten things out and make them more simple, to push decision-making and to push authority and responsibility commensurate with authority down further in the organization. So welcome to the future, right? So hierarchies are certainly less effective for younger workers. Millennials in particular have a real problem with not being part of the decision-making process. Organizational culture needs to adapt, needs to be more inclusive. And again, being more inclusive means getting to know your employees. And it's about creating this common culture might be a bit strong, but creating an organizational culture which is inclusive. So it sets a direction for people to work in. So again, decentralizing authority and driving development for everybody within the organization. Everybody contributes in an organization. Every single person that gets a paycheck from an organization contributes to the success of the organization. Right? And if they're not contributing to the success of the organization, then the job function should be adapted so that they are, or that they need to understand what their job function or how their job function contributes to the success of the organization. So, common cultures. And you're adapting as a leader to manage these, again, multi-generational, collaborative teams, empowered employees who you are increasingly giving more and more responsibility and accountability to. And you're encouraging your teams to be more self-organizing. You're encouraging your teams and your people to take on responsibilities and make decisions. And you as a leader and as a manager are supporting them in those decisions as well. So you're looking for these diverse perspectives. You're trying to avoid the blind spots. You're actively engaging with people who are not like you. And this is a change in people's thoughts, and this is a generational change as well. You're looking for people with a different viewpoint, because that different viewpoint brings something unique to the organization, right? It's those unique attributes that people have, and those unique qualities that people have that we talked about earlier that actually engender success for an organization. So you're practicing inclusion and participation. You're looking for the expertise and perspectives of your entire team. You're asking for feedback. You're always looking for feedback from your team, from your peers, and you're asking questions. One of the things about cross-cultural understanding is you can ask. If you don't understand why someone is working in a particular way or doing something in a particular way, and they're not from your culture, right? They're not from the culture you grew up in or that you're familiar with. Ask the question. Ask the question gently, but ask a question. You know, you will get an answer of some shape or form, and you can start to have that dialogue and discussion about how people act, what drives behavior. You know, again, feedback and interaction is part of developing and showing that you truly care about people's opinions, truly care about their thoughts, and truly care about their feelings. And again, coming in back to emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. So you're working in this new mindset. You're looking for fresh ideas. You're creating a team of highly engaged employees who not only want to be there, but they're exceeding your expectations. They're building something bigger than what you thought they were capable of doing. You're helping them create a strong vision. You're driving that vision, and that vision is valuable to the organization because this supports the overall organizational strategy. People who are highly engaged understand why they're doing something, and they're working in organizations that adapt to change well. The better you adapt to change, the more agile you are, the more likely you are to continue to succeed in this chaotic world that we currently live in. So you're building a vision. So you're looking to the future to see what you want. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about vision. We've all gone through it. Where are you going to be? What is the future going to be? How are we going to get there? What are the steps we're going to take to reach this sustainable organization in the future? Some organizations are taking it to build sustainable organizations, offering unlimited vacation. Okay, you take vacation when you want to. You don't have fixed hours of work. The focus is on, here's your role. Here's the output that is required from you. If you agree to this, and that's key in this whole piece about new visionaries, if you agree to provide those outputs, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I will provide you with the tools and support so that you can create those outputs that we need from you. But beyond that, it's your own. So you're almost building individual or small companies within your organization. Groups of people getting together to build the outputs, who then might take off for a week or two because they've put in crazy hours over 3 months, but then they're just going to stop working for a couple of weeks, right? So, but they make their own time, they manage it themselves, and you're supporting that. So you're building this path. You're building a path of a committed workforce of highly engaged employees, leaders who are supporting them, and there is purpose, and there's purpose that resonates through the organization. And you're building this passion for excellence. And that's it. You want to walk into an organization, you want to walk into work every day and know that the people who work there are passionate. And you know that the leadership team is passionate about the organization. And the leadership team leads by example. So there's transparent, open communication, good feedback systems, and a good vision, which inspires people to this level of excellence that we want to have. On that note, I will leave you. If you have any questions, we still have a little bit of time. So I'll open it up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. As Brian said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those in right now and we will address those shortly. I also wanted to remind everyone that New Horizons has launched our Center for Leadership and Development, which contains a full list of courses such as the one you just heard about. So if you are interested in any of the great material that was presented in this webinar, or if you have questions regarding our available course offerings, please contact your local center for further information. If you aren't familiar with your local New Horizons Center, you can log on to our website at newhorizons.com and do a zip code search for the center nearest you. There you will also see a full list of leadership and development courses. Just visit newhorizons.com, go to courses and certifications, and you'll see our leadership and development under there. So I also wanted to remind everyone that this webinar was being recorded, so I will send you all a link to view the session recording later today, and you can pass it on to any colleagues who may have missed the session as well. Brian, it looks like we don't have any questions for today's session, so I want to thank you again for your time and for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure, and everybody have a great Thanksgiving holiday.
Thank you so much, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Take care and have a great day.